Think you can spot a psychopath? Unless you know these 7 questions, you're probably living or working with one right now and have no idea. While you're looking for obvious red flags like violence or aggression, psychopaths are studying you like a predator studies prey, cataloging your weaknesses, mapping your triggers, and positioning themselves to exploit your trust. They're not the obvious monsters from movies. They're the charming colleague, the helpful neighbor, the perfect partner who's systematically dismantling your life from the inside. What I'm about to reveal comes from Dr. Robert Hare's classified FBI research, the same 7 questions forensic psychologists use to identify psychopaths in maximum security prisons. And here's what's terrifying: 96% of people have never learned these detection methods. You can either master these 7 questions that rip through their mask in under 5 minutes, or you can keep trusting your gut while they turn your own empathy into a weapon against you. Question 1: the empathy probe. The first question cuts straight to the core of psychopathic neurology, their inability to genuinely connect with others' emotional experiences. The question: can you tell me about a time when you felt really bad for someone else? What you're looking for. Normal people will immediately recall a specific situation: a friend's breakup, a family member's illness, witnessing an accident. They'll show genuine emotion in their voice and body language as they relive the empathetic experience. Psychopaths will do one of 3 things. They'll describe a situation where they appeared helpful, but focus on their own actions rather than the other person's suffering. They'll give a generic, rehearsed sounding response that lacks emotional authenticity. Or they'll flip the question to make themselves the victim. Well, I felt bad when someone didn't appreciate what I did for them. The science. Dr. James Blair's neuroimaging research shows that when normal people recall empathetic experiences, their mirror neuron systems activate intensely. Psychopaths show minimal activation in these brain regions, even when describing situations that should trigger empathy. Real example: I asked this question to 2 different people. The first immediately teared up describing their neighbor's cancer diagnosis and spent 5 minutes detailing their emotional response. The second gave a calculated response about helping someone, but every detail focused on how generous and helpful they appeared to others, with no mention of the other person's actual feelings or experience. Question 2: the guilt detector. The second question reveals their relationship with guilt and remorse, emotions that psychopaths can simulate but never genuinely experience. The question: what's something you did that you still feel guilty about? What you're looking for. Healthy people will describe specific actions they regret, show visible discomfort discussing it, and demonstrate understanding of how their behavior affected others. Their guilt is about the harm they caused, not about getting caught or facing consequences. Psychopaths will either claim they don't feel guilty about anything, red flag, describe feeling bad about getting caught rather than causing harm, or give responses that subtly blame others for their actions. They might say things like, I feel bad that people misunderstood my intentions, or I regret trusting someone who betrayed me. The science. Research from Harvard's Department of Psychology shows that genuine guilt activates the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain region responsible for emotional pain. Psychopaths show no activation in this area when discussing their harmful actions, even when they claim to feel remorseful. Critical warning sign. If they claim they've never done anything worth feeling guilty about, you're likely dealing with a psychopath. Normal humans accumulate genuine regrets throughout life. Question 3: the relationship archaeology. The third question exposes their pattern of relationship destruction and their inability to maintain genuine long-term connections. The question: tell me about your longest friendship and why it ended. What you're looking for. Normal people will describe friendships that lasted years, ended due to natural life changes or mutual growing apart, and they'll take some responsibility for the relationship's end. They'll speak fondly of positive memories even if the friendship ended badly. Psychopaths will reveal a pattern. Their longest friendships are surprisingly short. They'll blame the other person entirely for the ending, and they'll describe the former friend in completely negative terms with no acknowledgement of positive aspects. Most telling, they'll often describe multiple friendships that ended with the other person betraying them or showing their true colors. The science. Dr. Adele Forth's longitudinal research shows that psychopaths average 2.3 years for their longest adult friendships, compared to 8.7 years for non-psychopaths. They consistently describe themselves as the victim in relationship endings, showing no insight into their own contribution to the pattern. Red flag pattern. If every significant relationship in their life ended with the other person being crazy, jealous, or unable to handle their success, you're seeing the psychopathic victim narrative in action. Question 4: the moral flexibility test. The fourth question reveals their relationship with moral boundaries and their willingness to harm others for personal gain. The question: Is there anything you would never do, no matter what the circumstances? What you're looking for? Normal people will immediately identify moral absolutes, harming children, betraying family, certain types of cruelty. They'll speak with conviction about these boundaries and show discomfort, even imagining crossing them. Psychopaths will either claim they have no absolute moral boundaries, major red flag, or give responses that focus on practical consequences rather than moral principles. They might say, I'd never do anything that would get me in serious legal trouble, or I wouldn't do anything that would damage my reputation permanently. The science. Research from Oxford's Department of Experimental Psychology shows that psychopaths process moral decisions through different brain regions than normal people. They evaluate actions based on practical outcomes rather than inherent rightness or wrongness. Critical insight. Pay attention to whether their moral boundaries are actually just risk management strategies. True moral boundaries exist regardless of consequences. Question 5. The victim narrative detector. The fifth question exposes their tendency to position themselves as perpetual victims, while revealing their lack of genuine self-reflection. The question, what's the biggest injustice that's happened to you? What you're looking for. Normal people will describe genuine unfairness, but often include some self-reflection about their role or what they learned. They'll show proportionate emotional responses and acknowledge that others have faced worse situations. Psychopaths will describe elaborate persecution narratives where they were completely innocent victims of others' jealousy, incompetence, or malice. Their stories often involve multiple people conspiring against them, and they'll show no insight into how their own behavior might have contributed to the situation. The science. Dr. Martha Stout's research at Harvard reveals that psychopaths consistently reframe their harmful actions as defensive responses to others' attacks. They genuinely believe they're victims, even when they're clearly the aggressors. Warning pattern. If their biggest injustice involves everyone else being wrong and them being completely blameless, especially if it's a pattern across multiple situations, you're seeing psychopathic victim positioning. Question 6. The future fantasy probe. The sixth question reveals their grandiose self-perception and their disconnection from realistic planning and consequences. The question, where do you see yourself in 10 years? What you're looking for. Normal people will give realistic projections based on their current trajectory, acknowledge uncertainties, and include other people in their future vision. They'll show awareness of the work required to achieve their goals. Psychopaths will describe grandiose futures that seem disconnected from their current reality or efforts. They'll focus entirely on what they'll have or achieve, with little mention of relationships or contributions to others. Most telling, they'll describe these futures as inevitable rather than goals requiring sustained effort. The science. Research from the University of British Columbia shows that psychopaths consistently overestimate their future success and underestimate the effort required to achieve their goals. They live in what researchers call grandiose fantasy bubbles. Red flag indicators. Unrealistic timelines, no mention of obstacles or required work. Futures that center entirely on personal gain or status, and absolute certainty about outcomes that depend on many variables. Question 7. The emotional memory test. The seventh question reveals their shallow emotional processing and their inability to form deep emotional memories. The question, what's the happiest memory from your childhood? What you're looking for. Normal people will describe specific moments with rich emotional detail, often involving connections with others. They'll show genuine warmth recalling the memory and can explain why it was meaningful beyond just what happened. Psychopaths will give surprisingly shallow responses, often focusing on material acquisitions, achievements, or moments where they felt superior to others. Their happy memories often involve getting something they wanted or winning at something, rather than emotional connections or meaningful experiences. The science. Neuroscience research from the University of Montreal shows that psychopaths have impaired emotional memory formation. They remember events but not the emotional significance, leading to surprisingly flat recollections of what should be meaningful experiences. Critical pattern. If their happiest childhood memories center on material things, achievements, or moments of dominance rather than relationships or emotional experiences, you're seeing psychopathic emotional shallowness. How to interpret the responses. Here's how to evaluate their answers across all 7 questions. Green flags, normal responses. Specific, emotionally rich answers. Takes responsibility for their role in situations. Shows genuine empathy and remorse. Realistic self-assessment and future planning. Values relationships and emotional connections. Yellow flags concerning patterns. Vague or rehearsed sounding responses. Subtle blame shifting or victim positioning. Focus on appearances rather than genuine emotions. Grandiose but unrealistic self-perception. Red flags, psychopathic indicators. Complete absence of genuine empathy or guilt. Consistent victim narratives across all situations. No moral boundaries or purely practical morality. Grandiose fantasies disconnected from reality. Shallow emotional responses to meaningful questions. Critical insight. It's not about individual answers, but patterns across all 7 questions. Psychopaths will show consistent themes of shallow emotions, victim positioning, grandiosity, and lack of genuine empathy. How to use this test safely. These questions must be used strategically and safely. Never directly confront someone you suspect is a psychopath with your conclusions. This information is for your protection and decision-making, not for confrontation. Use casual conversation to work these questions into natural discussions. Don't make it feel like an interrogation. Trust patterns over individual answers. One concerning response doesn't indicate psychopathy, but consistent patterns across multiple questions should raise serious red flags. Document their responses if you're in a relationship or situation where you need evidence of their behavior patterns. Seek professional help if the test results suggest you're dealing with a psychopath, especially if you're in a romantic relationship, business partnership, or family situation with them. Remember, this test is a screening tool, not a clinical diagnosis, but it can provide crucial early warning signs that could protect you from years of manipulation and abuse. The 7 questions that reveal their true nature. The empathy probe. Tell me about a time you felt bad for someone else. The guilt detector. What do you still feel guilty about? The relationship archaeology. Tell me about your longest friendship. The moral flexibility test. What would you never do? The victim narrative detector. What's the biggest injustice you faced? The future fantasy probe. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? The emotional memory test. What's your happiest childhood memory? Remember, psychopaths are counting on your politeness and your assumption that no one could be that calculating. These questions give you the power to see through their mask before they can cause devastating damage to your life. Knowledge is your protection. Use these questions wisely, trust the patterns you discover, and prioritize your safety over their feelings. Your well-being depends on recognizing their true nature before they recognize you as their next target.